I remember the day like it was yesterday. It was a hot afternoon in Hollywood, and I was sitting in a chair on the set, watching people move things around, lost in my own thoughts. Then, out of nowhere, I felt a tongue in my ear. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I turned around, and there he was, Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll. "WHWH, what'd you say?" He stuttered, his eyes wide with surprise. I was so shocked, I didn't know what to do. But something inside me snapped. "Lay off," I said, my voice firm. I couldn't believe I had just told Elvis Presley to back off. But I did. And to my surprise, he just smiled and said, "Okay, if that's how you feel." I thought he would never speak to me again. But the next day, we were walking toward each other on the lot, and out of nowhere, he started singing, "Leon, Leon, Leon," which is Noel backward. It was so silly, I couldn't help but laugh. He had a great sense of humor, I had to admit. But the real shock came later, when I realized how different Elvis could be off the set. He was always so charming and funny with Shelley Fabares, one of the other actresses. They were like a brother and sister, always joking and teasing each other. I could tell he adored her, and she never acted like she was after him. It was refreshing to see him so relaxed. Then there was Mary Ann Mobley, the former Miss America. She was different from the rest of us. She was a lady, not just another pretty face. Elvis treated her with a kind of respect that I hadn't seen before. They talked about books and life, and it was clear that she understood him in a way that no one else did. He even told her about his brother and his spiritual questions. I could tell it meant a lot to him to have someone to talk to about those things, but not everyone was happy about Elvis's new interests. The Colonel, his manager, was worried that Elvis's spiritual journey would make him seem unstable. He didn't like the idea of Elvis spending so much time with Larry Geller, the new guy who was into all that metaphysical stuff. Even Priscilla, Elvis's girlfriend, seemed to be growing distant. She was always so quiet on the set, and I could tell she felt out of place. One night, Elvis invited Larry and his family to Graceland. I wasn't there, but I heard about it from the guys. They said Elvis was different that night, more serious and introspective. He talked about his life, his fears, and his hopes. It was like he was searching for something more, something deeper than fame and fortune. A few weeks later, we were all in Amarillo, Texas, on our way to the next movie set. I was staying in the same motel as Elvis, and I heard a commotion in the hallway. I peeked out and saw a shadowy figure crossing the room. It was Ann-Margret, one of Elvis's old flames. Jerry Schilling, the new guy in the entourage, was there too. He was so surprised to see her that he nearly had a heart attack. But Elvis just smiled and said, "It's okay, Jerry, it's just ammo. She's not gonna hurt anybody." Elvis was a complex person, full of contradictions. He could be the charming, funny guy on the set, but he could also be moody and distant. He was always searching for something, trying to find his place in the world. And as I watched him that night, I couldn't help but wonder what the future held for the king of rock and roll. It was the middle of the night when we drove through the panhandle of Texas, through New Mexico, and into eastern Arizona. The sky was a deep, electric blue, and the landscape was vast and empty. Elvis was driving the motorhome, and I was sitting next to him, feeling a bit uneasy. We were supposed to be part of a caravan, but somewhere along the way we got separated. I think we're lost," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but Elvis just shrugged. "This is really good, because I needed to be away from everyone. I'm into something very, very important within myself." As the day wore on, the sky became even more breathtaking. Suddenly, Elvis pointed out the window. "Look, man, do you see what I see?" I followed his finger and saw a strange cloud formation. "What the hell is Joseph Stalin doing in that cloud?" Elvis asked, his voice filled with amazement. I laughed. "I don't know. That is really far out." We kept driving, and the cloud slowly dissolved. Then I noticed a change in Elvis. His jaw dropped, and he gasped for breath. "Ah," he said, his eyes wide open, full of revelation. He pulled the motor home over and jumped out into the desert. "Watch, just follow me, man," he shouted. He ran about 30 feet away, turned around, and looked at me. Tears were rolling down his cheeks. He ran back, grabbed me, and hugged me. "I love you, I know now. It happened. I stood back, confused. I saw Stalin in the cloud. But what happened, man? Elvis struggled to regain his composure. Larry, you remember when you said, it's not a thing in your head. It has to do with your heart. I said, God, I surrender my ego. I surrender my whole life to you, and it happened. That face turned into the face of Christ. It was like a lightning bolt went right through me. I know the truth now, and I don't believe in God anymore. I know that God is a living reality. He's within us. He was laughing and crying at the same time, shaking with emotion. You can't understand it unless you get the experience, he said. Otherwise people will just think you are nuts, man. Just then, the caravan caught up with us. Red West stuck his head out the door. Hey boss, you all right? Yeah, Elvis yelled back. Don't worry about it. I'll be right there. Elvis was so shaken up that he couldn't drive, so he called for Red to take the wheel. Come on, man, he said to me. Let's go in the back. He laid down on the bed and kept repeating, wow, wow, softly like a mantra. When we got back to the motor home, Elvis was still discombobulated. He talked about giving up his career and entering a monastery. He spent a lot of time with a woman named Fay Wright, better known as Sri Amata, at the Self-Realization Fellowship's Lake Shrine Retreat in Pacific Palisades. Mary Ann Mobley, Elvis's co-star in Harum Scarum, dropped by Colonel Parker's office one day to sign her contract. Time magazine called while she was there. They said they wanted to put Elvis on the cover, and Colonel Tom said, good, that'll be $25,000 or some outrageous price. And Time said, you don't understand, it's an honor to be on the cover of Time. And Colonel Tom said, no, you don't understand, we don't need you. Parker, still gloating that Elvis was the first actor ever to be paid $1 million for a single movie. Might have been smart to let Time promote Harum Scarum. Despite Elvis's astonishing fee, the picture was a disaster. It was shot in just 18 days, using recycled sets and costumes. The plot was thin, the music was bad, and seeing Elvis in a turban was just plain ridiculous. Even the Colonel admitted it would take a 55th cousin to P.T. Barnum to sell it. Mary Ann, who played Princess Shalimar, said, Elvis said, this isn't going to change history, is it? I said no, but it's gonna make people laugh. Elvis was a good sport about the whole thing. He never complained about his costume or the script. He was never late and never caused any trouble. It was just so easy working with him. But there were signs that Elvis was going through some changes. He was into the metaphysical then, willing things to move. That was unique to me. I was worried about it, but it was not for me to judge. If that works for him, then that's fine. Barbara Eden, who was also in the movie, found Elvis more outgoing and confident than before. He'd laugh out loud, but he was still the same basic, good, sweet, malleable guy. Such a gentleman. Elvis had his moments, though. When he was doing Harum Scarum, we found out that Rudolph Valentino was buried in the Hollywood Forever Cemetery. So we drove over there at 11 o'clock at night and poked around a little bit, and we found Valentino's grave. Elvis just wanted to see it. We walked around cemeteries a few times. That's the only place nobody bothered us. In March 1965, the Colonel convinced Elvis that Joe Esposito should come back into the group. Parker didn't like Marty Lacker, who refused to kowtow to him. The Colonel wanted more control over Elvis, and Joe seemed like the perfect choice. For a while, Joe and Marty were co-foremen of the Memphis Mafia. But Marty's days were numbered, especially since Joe was a favorite of Priscilla. Priscilla, who was still a teenager, felt like a child woman. She was trying to find her place and become more assertive. I am a misfit, she said. But I have a remarkable interior gyroscope, which keeps me on course. As Priscilla grew more confident, the group started to split into different camps. Jerry Schilling, Joe, and Priscilla became a tight-knit group, and Marty felt left out. It became like I and Second Family, said Lamar. It just galled Billy and Marty. Elvis didn't want the wives to come to California or accompany their husbands on trips. He was going to play around, and he didn't want anybody carrying tales. Lamar explained. Being with Elvis put a strain on marriages and families. I was home so infrequently that my kids would wonder who was coming to the extra place at the table. Billy's wife, Jo, was especially hurt. Elvis couldn't live without Billy. He felt like he had saved him. When our first child was born, Elvis wouldn't let Billy come home. I lived in fear that Elvis would take Billy away forever. Elvis's dependency on pills was also becoming a problem. Alan, one of the guys, had developed a serious addiction to downers. We had to haul Alan over to UCLA Medical Center in 1965. He had 35 yellow jackets in him. He tried to kill himself over this tug-of-war between Elvis and his wife. To ease the tension, Elvis invited Joe Smith to live in the house in L.A. in the mid-1960s, but this only made things worse. Joe thought Elvis was jealous of her closeness with Billy. He wanted a similar closeness with just one woman, but he wanted the closeness to be just on the wife's part. In May, Elvis started work on Frankie and Johnny at MGM. He became the first star in studio history to have 2 dressing rooms, one for himself and one for the guys. The movie was a comedic take on the old folk song, set in a Victorian period. Elvis and Donna Douglas, who played Frankie, would often discuss metaphysical topics. He didn't try to date her. They just talked books and religion. Elvis was reading Timothy Leary's The Psychedelic Experience and Aldous Huxley's The Doors of Perception. He encouraged the guys to try LSD while he watched. He even tried smoking pot, though it burned his throat. One time, Elvis and Priscilla accidentally got into some of Lamar's marijuana brownies and stayed in the bedroom for days. They just stayed ripped the whole time, Lamar said. When he confessed, Elvis just held out the tray and said, "Lamar, put another ounce in there." By late July, Elvis was in trouble. He was experimenting with barbiturates, particularly Seconal and Tuinal. His eating habits hadn't changed, and he showed up at Paramount for pre-production on Paradise Hawaiian Style a week late, citing illness. His appearance was shocking. He looked jowly and puffy, and he perspired so much that he frequently changed his shirts. Director Mickey Moore was appalled. Elvis was supposed to look lean and rugged, but he was so pudgy that he split his pants. I was on the set of Paradise Hawaiian Style, and things were getting a bit tense. Producer Hal Wallis was always complaining about Elvis's weight to Colonel Parker. He even sent his sister, Mina, to check on Elvis at the studio. She hugged him and felt his waist, which made Elvis really angry. He told Marty, "That got him, old fucking bitch." It was clear that Elvis was sensitive about his weight. Paradise Hawaiian Style was the last movie in Elvis's 1961 contract with Wallis. During filming, the Colonel was trying to negotiate a new deal for Elvis, $500,000 per picture and 20% of the profits. He also wanted a non-singing role for Elvis. Wallis kept putting it off, though. Elvis, Priscilla, his dad Vernon, and his stepmom Dee flew to Hawaii for the filming. A bunch of his friends, like Jerry Schilling, Larry Geller, and Red West, went with them. Joe Smith, who was pregnant, stayed in California with Patsy Lacker and her kids. Joe was new to the West Coast and was really scared when the Watts riots broke out. She was alone and terrified, wondering what she had gotten herself into. In Hawaii, the set was full of drama. Elvis was juggling friendships with 3 starlets, Susanna Lee, Julie Parrish, and Mariana Hill, and a child actress, Donna Butterworth. Priscilla didn't visit the set much, which might have made it easier for Elvis to flirt with Mariana. She was 24 with long dark hair and exotic looks. But she didn't really think much of Elvis, calling him a show business phenomenon. They did a dance number together, but she didn't want to spend time with him off the set because of his entourage. Susanna Lee was a British actress who had grown up dreaming of making a movie with Elvis. She was nervous when they met, but they quickly found a connection. Elvis was fascinated by her religious experiences, and they talked a lot about spirituality. Colonel Parker, who didn't like anyone influencing Elvis, made up a story that Susanna had sold Elvis out to the press. When Elvis found out, he saved her by taking her to his photo session and kissing her for the camera. Julie Parrish, who had been a fan since she was a teen, was also on the set. She was nervous around Elvis at first, but they grew closer. She had some health issues during filming and was worried about what everyone thought when Elvis carried her to his dressing room to try to heal her. She later found out that her problems might have been related to the drugs and alcohol she was using. Young Donna Butterworth, who was only 10, was confused by all the kissing on the set. She asked Elvis why he was kissing other girls when he said he would marry Priscilla. Elvis explained that while you can love everyone as a brother or sister, you are really in love with one person, Priscilla. He took the time to explain this to her over lunch in his dressing room. Elvis's relationship with Hal Wallis was tense. One day, while rehearsing with Donna, Wallis came to the set, and Elvis stormed off to his trailer. He didn't come back until Wallis left. On his days off, Elvis visited the USS Arizona Memorial, which he had helped fund. He was moved by the sight of the oil, still bubbling up from the sunken ship. He couldn't stop thinking about the men who had died there. Back in L.A., Elvis and the Colonel had a surprise visit from the Beatles. They were all nervous, and there was a moment of silence before Elvis said, "If you guys are just going to stare at me all night, I'm going to bed." That broke the ice, and they played some music together. Later, John Lennon said it was the best night of his life. Paul thought it was odd. The Beatles left, and Elvis was thinking about the fans who were shouting for him and the Beatles. He felt a bit self-conscious, wondering if he was still as big as he used to be. Larry told him, "I think you won, Elvis," and that made him feel better. Elvis's record sales were down, but the Colonel renegotiated his contract with RCA. The new deal was much better, with $300,000 guaranteed and a 5% royalty. RCA was amazed by Elvis's longevity. They never expected him to stay so popular for so long. I spent a lot of my free time diving deeper into mysticism. I was really into folk music too, and I listened to a lot of Peter, Paul and Mary, Ian and Sylvia and Odetta. I even tried listening to Bob Dylan, but his voice was too sharp for me. In October, we started building a meditation garden at Graceland, right by the swimming pool. It was designed by my friend Marty Lacker's sister and brother-in-law, Ann and Bernie Grenadier. They made it look like the Self-Realization Park, with stained glass panels, marble statues, and a fountain with underwater light. During the Christmas holidays, Sonny helped me take acid for the first time. It was a group thing, and we all sat around the conference table. I split up some tabs, and Lamar got his own big dose. Soon Jerry started seeing me as a child, then as a baby. Everyone was laughing, and the next thing Jerry knew, he was in my closet eating dates. Priscilla, who usually didn't care much about my spiritual stuff, joined in. But then she started crying, saying I didn't really love her. She even told Larry and Jerry that they didn't like her and that she was ugly. I tried to comfort her, but it didn't work. Eventually, we all went outside and talked about how much we cared for each other. Lamar, though, tried to dive into the hood of a 1964 Cadillac, thinking it was a pool. I kept visiting Sri Dayamata in California. She helped me with self-control and meditation. I read her book, Only Love, and kept it close. I called her Ma, but Priscilla said she looked like my mom Gladys. On my next movie, Spin Out, I met Deborah Wally. At first, she wasn't interested in me because she was a Beatles fan, but when we met, she was blown away by my charisma. We became really close, and I taught her about different religions and how to meditate. We had lunch every day in my trailer, and I took her for motorcycle rides. The guys joked about it, but Deborah was really grateful. When Spin Out wrapped in April, I drove home in my new Greyhound bus. We traveled by night and slept during the day. At the Western Skies Motel in Albuquerque, I had my guys bring in my Sony Betamax video machine to watch some sex tapes. One night, I called a girl to meet me there, and we stayed for 4 days. The guys were upset because they wanted to get home to their families. I was in a bad mood because of 2 things. First, Hal Wallis, my producer, didn't renew my contract. He said the times were changing, and there wasn't a market for the no-plot musicals anymore. I was relieved, but also sad because Wallis was the one who brought me to Hollywood. The second thing was that Ann-Margret got engaged to Roger Smith. I knew they saw each other, but I didn't think it was serious. I was upset when I found out. I was home for a few weeks in May, but I was still in a bad mood. James Brown tried to reach me, but I told my guys I was sleeping. I watched movies at the Crosstown Theater instead. At the end of the month, I went to Nashville to record my first non-soundtrack music in over 2 years. I had a new producer, Felton Jarvis, who was great. I was excited to record 2 singles, a Christmas song and a religious album. The religious recordings, especially How Great Thou Art, were really special. I put everything I had into it, and when I finished, I was so exhausted that I was nearly on my knees. Felton and the guys were really moved by it. But then I got a cold, and I didn't want to go to the studio. I stayed at the Albert Pick Motel, which was pretty run down. My guys tried to record demos to match my voice, but it didn't work. I finally went to the studio, but only did 3 songs in 30 minutes. In June, I was back in L.A. for Double Trouble. I really liked the young actress Annette Day, and I surprised her with a Mustang. The problem was, it was Jerry Schilling's car, so I gave him a Cadillac to make up for it. Double Trouble was set in the English discotheque scene, but we didn't go to England to shoot it. I was really frustrated because everyone else was shooting their movies in different locations, but the Colonel wouldn't let me leave town. He even turned down an engagement in Japan. The day after I started filming Double Trouble, my Uncle Tracy, Gladys's brother, passed away. I was really sad about it. In January, I moved to a new house on Rocca Place in Bel Air. It was more private for me and Priscilla, but I still wanted to spend weekends in Palm Springs or Las Vegas for parties. I didn't really care how it affected my relationship with Priscilla. Joe told me about the time we went to Las Vegas, and we stayed for 6 weeks. We were out every night, chasing showgirls, partying, and seeing great acts. We'd party all night and sleep in the morning. I remember Elvis getting nosebleeds because we weren't resting enough. The doctor told us to slow down, but after a couple of days, we just started over. Twice, we were 100 miles out of Vegas, and Elvis said, "What are we going home for? Let's go back." In Palm Springs, we found girls by driving around and using Elvis as bait. We'd always come back to the house with carloads of women. We'd talk, smoke grass, drink, and even have orgies. One night, everyone was at the pool, and Elvis was with one of his guests. Things got wild, and Red pulled off Elvis's towel. Elvis was usually very modest, and he was embarrassed, so he jumped in the pool and went back to his room. Elvis seemed to be torn between partying and wanting to be spiritual. He'd sometimes preach to the guests, and it became a game for him. One night, after everyone had been smoking marijuana, Elvis got on the coffee table and started reading from the Bible. He said, "Woe ye motherfuckers," and we all laughed so hard. The Colonel, who had a free house in Palm Springs, wanted Elvis to spend his weekends there. Elvis didn't really want to, but he signed a lease on a house there. He started to hate the Colonel, who was overweight and had a bad back, and Elvis would do impersonations of him to us. Elvis was in a bad mood during the filming of Easy Come, Easy Go. He didn't like the director, John Rich, and they got into a fight. Elvis thought the movie was making fun of his interest in Eastern philosophy, and believed the Colonel had put it in the script. He was so upset that he told the studio, "When the movies stop being fun, we'll stop doing them." On the way back to Memphis, Elvis heard Tom Jones's Green, Green Grass of Home on the radio. It made him think of his mom, and he stopped at payphones to hear the song over and over. When we got to Graceland, Elvis went upstairs and wouldn't come down for days. He was really upset. Elvis started getting into horseback riding. He bought horses for everyone at Graceland, and even a black quarter horse named Domino for Priscilla as a Christmas gift. On Christmas Eve, he proposed to her. He said, "We're going to be married," and gave her a ring with 21 diamonds, one for each year of her life. Elvis felt at peace when he was at the ranch he bought near Graceland. He called it the Circle G Ranch. He spent a lot of time there, fixing things and taking care of the horses. It was like a dream come true for him. He felt like he finally had a place where he could be himself. I had just let my 43-year-old aunt, Delta Me Biggs, move into Graceland after her husband, Pat, passed away. Pat was a riverboat gambler and nightclub owner who had a big influence on me. He taught me to dream big and to want a nice house and car, even though he couldn't hold on to his own money. People said Pat and Delta lived the wild life, moving from casino to casino, but no one knew the full story. Aunt Delta was a tough cookie. She had diabetes and was an alcoholic, which didn't help her mood. She hated almost everyone, and wasn't afraid to show it. She once even set her wig on fire, because someone liked it and asked for it. But she was family, and after Pat died, she had nowhere else to go. Dad and I felt we had to help her out. I wanted to build a new home for Priscilla and me at the Circle G Ranch, near the Cross and the Big Lake. I also planned to give each of my friends an acre of land to build their own houses. They were all excited, but Dad had other ideas. He did the math and said it was too expensive. I let him win that battle, but I came up with another plan. I'd buy them trailers instead. I bought a 3-bedroom trailer for Priscilla and me and ended up buying 12 trailers in total, costing $140,000. But that wasn't enough. I also bought 22 trucks in one day and 3 more another day, giving them to anyone who needed one, even the workers at the ranch. I loved seeing people's faces when I did something like that. It made me feel good to give big gifts to people who couldn't afford them, but my dad, Vernon, was not happy. He was always worried about people taking advantage of my generosity. One day, he walked out of the office at the ranch with an adding machine tape and a flashlight, whining about how much I had spent on trucks. I told Marty to break the news to the guys, but I felt bad about it. I started using barbiturates to calm myself and tune out Dad's complaints. I also got into Demerol, a strong painkiller, and it became a big part of my routine. I flew Marty out to see a dentist in L.A. who gave me prescriptions for more pills. When I ran out, I'd do almost anything to get more. One Sunday, I even suggested breaking into a closed Walgreens, but then I had a better idea. I asked Marty and Richard to find out where the pharmacist lived. We went to his house and I explained my problem. He gave me a bag full of pills, and I promised to get prescriptions to cover them all. The pills affected my appetite, and I started craving weird things like hamburger and hot dog buns, which I ate straight from the bag while riding my horse, Rising Sun. I was getting heavier, and the ranch felt like a never-ending vacation. I was supposed to start filming Clambake in March, but I kept finding excuses to stay at the ranch. I even arranged to record the soundtrack in Nashville, instead of going to L.A. Dad was worried about my health, so he called in Dr. George C. Nishapoulos, known as Dr. Nick. Dr. Nick was a good doctor, and he came to the ranch to check on me. He and I got along well, and he became a regular part of my life. When I went to L.A. for the movie, I was 200 pounds, 30 pounds heavier than usual. Colonel Parker, my manager, was not happy. He told me to lose weight fast. One night, I tripped over a TV cord in the bathroom and hit my head on the tub. I was dizzy the next morning, and the guys noticed something was wrong. Joe called the colonel, and he sent a doctor with nurses to check on me. I had a mild concussion, and filming had to be delayed for 2 weeks. This incident made the colonel even more controlling. He called a meeting and laid down new rules. Joe would be the only foreman, and there would be no more talks about religion. He also cut everyone's salaries and told some of them to look for other jobs. He even increased his commission to 50% of my earnings. It was a tough time, but I had no choice. I had to follow his rules to keep my career in Graceland. Everyone in the group was shocked when Elvis just stared at the floor, not saying a word. We all made only $200 a week, and we wondered how we could keep our apartments on such a small amount. But Elvis didn't give us any answers. He just looked so passive and defeated, and we couldn't understand why he let Colonel Parker get away with everything. After that, things got really tense. My relationship with Elvis, the Colonel, and even my dad and Priscilla all became strained. Jerry got married that same week and decided to leave to become a film editor. It was like losing a limb, it hurt so much. A month later, on April 30th, Larry also left. He said it was to stop causing Elvis more problems with the Colonel. Early in May, Priscilla convinced Elvis to gather all the religious books the Colonel had banned and dump them in an old well at Graceland. We poured gasoline over them and set them on fire. But 5 years later, Elvis told Larry that he had tricked us. He only threw in a few books. I couldn't burn all of them. That's what the Nazis did, he said. Larry found out it was true. All the books were still there. Over the years, most of us would come and go, but Elvis's close circle was shrinking. He felt vulnerable and alone. He never really connected with his stepbrothers, who were still teenagers. Dr. Nick said that Elvis often wished he had a brother or sister. He wanted to be part of a family. Elvis and Shelley Fabares had a special bond. They worked together in 3 movies, and they understood each other without words. We had a great time on set, even though some of the movies were really stupid. We'd look at each other and laugh, trying to make the lines sound real. Our friendship might have turned into something more, but Shelley always told Elvis she was dating someone. Even when she broke up with him, She said she was engaged. Finally, she got married, and Elvis joked that she was just trying to stop him. In April, there were rumors that Elvis was going to get married. Rona Barrett thought it was true, but Sonny and Larry dismissed it because no one in the group had mentioned a wedding. What we didn't know was that the Colonel, my dad, and Priscilla had formed a group to pressure Elvis into getting married. They wanted to control his wild spending and stop his philandering. Priscilla even faked a suicide attempt to get his attention. On May 1st, 1967, Elvis and Priscilla got married in Las Vegas. The ceremony was quick and quiet, and only a few people were there. The press conference afterward was weird. Priscilla's stepfather said she would be a good wife, and Elvis turned to his dad for help with questions. But my dad just smiled and said, "I can't reach you, son. You just slipped through my fingers." After the ceremony, we had a fancy breakfast, and then Elvis and Priscilla flew to Palm Springs for their honeymoon. The Colonel arranged everything, and we went along with it for the sake of secrecy. Later, Priscilla said she wished we had given ourselves more time and invited more people. When Larry and Sonny found out about the wedding, they were shocked. Larry saw it in the newspaper, and Sonny was on location for a movie. It hurt a lot of people, especially Red, who didn't speak to Elvis for 2 years. Some of us were invited to a second reception at Graceland, but it was too late to mend the hurt feelings. Elvis's fans had mixed reactions. Some thought it was great, but others considered him a has-been. In Europe, the girls were more upset. When Elvis and Priscilla got home, they went to the Circle G, and that's where Priscilla got pregnant. They had sex for the first time there, and it felt like a fairy tale. But being married didn't change Elvis. He still had feelings for Ann-Margret. He sent her flowers in the shape of a guitar for her shows in Las Vegas. One day, he went to her dressing room and told her how he still felt about her. He even dropped to one knee and took her hands. But he had 3 women on his mind: Ann-Margret, Nancy Sinatra, and Priscilla, who was pregnant. When Priscilla found out she was pregnant, Elvis was thrilled. He called her Belly and announced it to the press. But Priscilla was hurt because Elvis was always talking about women who let themselves go during pregnancy. She was determined to stay fit and only ate eggs and apples. She never saw a doctor and stayed in her bubble with Elvis and their friends. Nancy Sinatra was making a movie with Elvis, and they flirted a lot. She refused to have an affair with a married man, but they played games in her trailer. One day, she was changing clothes and Elvis surprised her. They had a moment, but he apologized and left. Elvis's interest in Priscilla waned after she got pregnant. He couldn't stand the smell of the cocoa butter she used on her stomach, and they fought about it. One night, she threw the cocoa butter at him, but he didn't throw anything back. He just said he couldn't do that to a pregnant woman. The bigger issue was that Elvis equated Priscilla with his mother, Gladys. He didn't feel comfortable being intimate with a woman who had a child. It was a complicated emotional mess that neither of them understood. Priscilla and I had a daughter and everything changed. I was 33 and on top of the world. Lisa Marie came into our lives, and it felt like all the searching I'd been doing, all the spiritual stuff led me to this. Holding her in my arms, I knew I had found a piece of something I'd been missing. She looked just like me and Gladys, with those dark eyes and thick black hair. I was over the moon, and I adored her more than anything. Priscilla and I had our ups and downs, but nothing prepared me for the moment when she told me she was ready to have the baby. I was a nervous wreck trying to act cool, but inside I was a mess. We rushed to the hospital, and finally, on February 1st, 1968, at 5:01 p.m., Lisa Marie arrived. I was in heaven. I became a dad, and it was everything I could have wanted. I was so proud, and I wanted to protect her with everything I had. A few days later, we took Lisa Marie to visit Gladys's grave. We left a wreath of flowers and a card from all of us. It was a bittersweet moment, but it felt right. Being a father made me think more about life and death, and about the spirit. It was a time of big changes, but not everything was smooth. My friend Nick Adams died by suicide a few days after Lisa Marie was born. It was a shock, and it hit me hard. I had seen him on the set of Girl Happy, and he seemed okay. It made me realize how fragile life can be. My career was also at a crossroads. My movies weren't doing as well as they used to, and I was feeling restless. Colonel Parker was trying to find new projects for me, but nothing seemed to fit. Then in 1967, he struck a deal with NBC for a TV special. It was a chance for me to get back to my roots and perform live again. The special was set to tape in June and air in December. Before that, I had to make another movie, Live a Little, Love a Little. It was a different kind of film, a comedy where I played a photographer. I got to sing a few songs, including The Edge of Reality and A Little Less Conversation, which was a fun modern track. I even had a cute scene with Celeste Yarnall, where I picked her up at a pool party. We hit it off and we had a good time on set. Making that movie was a blast, and it felt like a fresh start. I was ready to get back to what I loved, performing and making music. The TV special was going to be a big deal, and I was excited about it. It was a new chapter in my life, and I was ready to embrace it. With Lisa Marie in my life, I felt like I had found my purpose. I was a dad, and I was going to be the best dad I could be. I was also ready to reconnect with my fans and show them the real Elvis. It was the start of a monumental year, and I couldn't wait to see what the future held.